Greetings, everyone. My name is Sarah Barnes, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, I would like to welcome you to Fundraising Communications 4, one of 5 webinars in our free communications webinar series. We are broadcasting live from our office in downtown Chicago. We hope you're all having a fantastic day, and thank you so much for joining us. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. Close any programs other than GoToWebinar, of course. We recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. Move your cell phone away from your computer. And finally, if you experience any visual issues, you can send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you'll earn 1 continuing education credit that is good with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive an email from us that includes information on how to download your certificate. And yes, this webinar is being recorded. The follow-up email will also contain a link to the recording. We do welcome questions at the end, and please use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right of your screen. We will also hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Now I would like to turn it over to Andy Brommel. He's our Director of Communications Consulting here at Campbell & Company. Andy?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining us for Fundraising Communications 4, Fundraising Materials That Work. We'll talk a little bit about how this fits into our communications series, but just so you know who this guy is, I'm Director of Communications Consulting for Campbell & Company. So I'm based out of Chicago. I lead our communications services team, which is a team of consultants who do case development, fundraising communications, a lot of campaign communications. We provide creative services across the nonprofit sector. So our team is a group of brilliant, wonderful, creative professionals, and a lot of what I'm sharing here today is going to be their work and their insights and kind of really showing you a lot of the ways that we are working with organizations day to day and year to year to help them achieve their goals and solve their communications puzzles. So this webinar is part of our larger series, which we do every year, and this is the 4th webinar in that series. We'll show you that in a second. And through the whole series, what we're really trying to do is answer this overarching question of how do we tell our story in a fundraising context? Because we see over and over again organizations that we work with, whether they're large and sophisticated and raising tons of money, or smaller and just getting started. So many of them struggle with this. So few organizations really have the dedicated capacity and expertise around fundraising communications. They may have a bunch of fundraising people, they may have a bunch of communications people, but at the nexus of those is this tricky question that even really big and robust fundraising programs often struggle with. So that's what this webinar series is really aimed at, and we have 5 sessions in it. I hope that some of you have seen some of our previous sessions earlier over the last year. Just to recap those, they kind of build on each other, but if you haven't seen any of the other ones, you're going to be just fine. This is not calculus. So the first session is all about defining your case for support, the core ideas of what we're trying to communicate. The second session is all about crafting your message. It's more of a writing-focused session that's all about how do you take your ideas and craft them into the simplest, most compelling ways to reach donors with a clear message. Third session, which we did a few months ago, is all about getting your volunteers on message and getting them comfortable using your case, which we all know is a challenge. Today's session is all about fundraising materials. What do we create and produce and equip ourselves with so that it makes our jobs easier as fundraisers? And we got one left in the series coming up in July that's really all about campaign communications. So it kind of draws on some of the stuff from the previous sessions, but really packages it together in a campaign-specific structure. So if you're going into a campaign, if you're in the middle of a campaign, if you just are a fundraiser and you know you will do campaigns again, this one might be useful for you. And also it's kind of a good way to kind of synthesize and recap some of the things that you may have encountered earlier in the series. So why am I telling you about webinars that have already happened? It's because if you didn't see them, they're all archived on the Campbell & Company YouTube channel. So you can go there, check out any of the previous ones if you missed them, or if you just want to refresh on them. So that's our series, and I love today's session because you get to see how messaging and a strong case can come together in materials that are really useful for you and that are useful for your volunteers. So it does kind of relate to the other sessions as well. So as Sarah mentioned, ask questions throughout. Those will come up in our do it through the little chat box thing in the GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar client. And to the extent that we have time, I'll answer as many of those as I can. And if we don't have as much time or we have lots of questions, I can always respond to those by email. So let's jump in with today's session, and let's get started with a question that I think, it's the place to start. And this maybe you asked yourself this question this morning when you realized you had this webinar on your calendar today. Why did I sign up for this? Why bother? Why care about or pay attention to or invest time or resources into developing fundraising materials? And when I say fundraising materials, just a quick, here's what I'm talking about. Durable communications tools that are specifically developed to support your fundraising strategy. So what that means is we're not exactly talking about your annual fund appeals, which sort of are more ephemeral. We're not really talking about your annual report or sort of general communications that your organization does that may be useful in fundraising, but it's not really what they're specifically for. We're talking about the tools that you would reach for to send in advance of a donor visit, or to guide and support a conversation during a donor visit, or to leave behind after a donor visit. So sort of before, during, and after. What tools do you have that actually make it easier to go talk to people, ask them, cultivate them, solicit them, steward them? These are also the kinds of materials you might use to present to a corporation, foundation, a community partner, when you have to sort of, any opportunity you have to go out and sort of make your pitch for the organization. Do you have the tools that are specifically designed to help you with that? Stuff to hand out at an event, stuff to equip your board and staff to help them communicate on message, help them feel comfortable going out there and doing their sort of ambassador fundraiser roles. So I think when you look at these half dozen functions that we've got here, these are all pretty important, and yet how many of these do you really feel very well equipped for? What we see a lot is that organizations, even though they're doing all of these things all the time, somehow it's always a little bit of a surprise, or they get snuck up on by the need for these kinds of things. So you've got a donor visit, you've got a community foundation presentation or something. And so we see organizations, they sort of throw stuff together, grab the annual report, grab the strategic plan, grab some recent publications, pack that stuff up. You're using, when you're using general marketing materials for really specific fundraising purposes, it can be fine, especially, in the hands of a skilled fundraiser, it's totally fine. But I don't know, it's a little bit like using a Swiss Army knife to do surgery. So we think you ought to have durable communications tools. That means they have some shelf life to them, that are specifically developed to support your fundraising strategy for a few different reasons. First of all, materials have a way of making your ideas real to people, to your audience, to your donors, and actually to you. There's something that happens when you have a print piece or a nicely designed presentation deck, and you come to someone with an idea that you'd like them to invest in. When you can put something it doesn't have to be elaborate, but when you put something that feels finished or polished, or that just feels like you can see the level of thought and care that's gone into it, it makes that project or that idea real to them. There's a lot of things that you may want to do or be on the path to doing within your organization, but when you get to the point where you can actually distill that and turn it into something you can put in someone's hands, you get their attention in a different way. And for you, it also kind of makes your ideas real, because the exercise of having to take whatever project you're trying to raise money for, or your campaign, or your case, whatever it is, when you have to actually commit ideas to paper, it forces you to make decisions about what it is you're really saying. So the actual exercise doesn't just sort of distill your ideas, it can actually sort of advance and help you refine your ideas. Another good reason is that materials give fundraisers confidence. And I'm talking about all kinds of fundraisers here, your staff, your CEO, your major gift officers, and especially your board members or campaign committee members or development committee members, whatever those volunteers are for you. It's just kind of a basic thing. Like, people don't like to go into donor visits empty-handed. When they don't have materials, they feel like they don't have a case. They feel like they don't have, even if they know what they're supposed to say, they know the message points or the talking points, they know that they feel they can get a little squirrely when they don't have something physically to in their hands to share. And sometimes that becomes an objection. You'll hear your board members say, "Oh, of course I'm willing to go ask people for money, but I'm just, I can't do that until we have a case." You say, "Oh, we know what we need to say. Here's the talking points. Here's the messaging, whatever. Here's the case." But it doesn't feel like they have a case until they have something sort of in their hands. And when they do, they feel confident. They feel like, I have something to give. If a donor asks me some tough question, I may be able to find the answer by looking through these materials. On the screen, you will see beloved cartoon elephant, Dumbo. If you remember this excellent film, the key to the story is that he has this feather that he believes makes him able to fly. It's actually, he can fly because his giant ears are like wings. So, and I'm going to spoil it for you. Sorry. He loses the feather and has to learn that he actually can fly without it. So materials are that way sometimes for your board members. They give them the confidence to go out there and fly, even if maybe they probably could do it without, just by drawing on their own personal passion and storytelling. It helps them have that confidence. So that's a little, So that's kind of a few points about why these materials matter. And what we find over and over again is that most organizations would really benefit from taking the time to develop better fundraising materials. It's the kind of thing that it has a fairly straightforward and tangible effect on your fundraising strategy, your ability to go out and make asks. It makes it easier to get your volunteers to go do stuff. But it's the kind of thing that often doesn't get done because it's sort of an extra project on the side. It may not be absolutely essential to any specific meeting. So it's kind of in that, like, can be in that zone of like really important but not entirely urgent, which is like where good ideas go to die, right? So what if we take just one thing away from this? It's that try to find a way to carve out the time, the attention really is what matters most, and the resources to the extent that you need them, to produce materials that are specifically designed to help your fundraisers do their work. The other point I want to make sure I come back to regularly throughout this presentation is that you can do this well on any budget. We're going to show you some materials here that are samples of our work, when you go to conferences or you see what other organizations are doing, you see what's like winning awards for best, campaign materials. That's useful, but it can be a little, it can be a little discouraging. Maybe it can be a little intimidating. You see how much like the big fundraising organizations are what they're doing, what kinds of brochures they have and that kind of stuff. And I just want to sort of take the air out of that because, first of all, like, not all of that expensive stuff is really all that good. Sometimes it's just expensive. It doesn't actually cost money to come up with a really good message. And you can spend a lot of money and still have kind of a weak message. We actually see that pretty regularly. Our team believes we act on the idea that most organizations really can do a great job with messaging and materials that are totally useful and effective for them just by putting in the time and the thought, and then the budget piece of it you can really scale up and down to whatever works for you. So that's I'm going to try to show you sort of how you can do that through the examples and process we outlined today. So let's talk a little bit about what materials you really need. And there's a wide range of possibilities here, and I want this to be very focused on the basics, the things that we think probably every organization has some level of need for, and that any organization can do and are sort of within reach for you to do over the next 3 to 6 months if you just dedicate the time and the attention and to some degree resources to it. So first and foremost, this is kind of an unexpected place to start, I think, for most organizations, but we really believe that every organization needs and benefits from a great case presentation deck that serves a variety of purposes. And, this may not be where you think you're going to start, because you think, okay, we have our case, we're going to write a case statement, that's a big Word document, then we'll turn that into maybe a brochure, and now we have a case, right? We actually, within our team, the way we work with organizations project to project, we almost always start with actually a presentation deck format. I'll tell you why. Because first of all, it forces you to use out loud language, like conversational language. If all of this is about helping you have good donor conversations, you have to structure your case and your materials around like giving you language you could actually use in a conversation that you could say out loud without sounding like some sort of weird robot. It also gets you thinking in both words and images. So, it's a very flexible format to start pairing messages with photographs and graphics and charts. And, it's a way to figure out how you want to convey your case both verbally and visually before you have to, put it into a print piece. A good case presentation deck will have a lot of different uses. You can do more, the thing that people usually do with presentations, which is to sort of staged presentation setups where you have a projector and a screen and you're, standing in front of a group and doing that whole thing. You can do that with it, but if you have a good presentation deck, you can also print it out. We'll show you an example of this. Print it out as a flip book. Maybe put a little spiral binding on the top and just use it as your one-on-one conversation to walk through. And when you go into a meeting with that, and your board members know, whoever's doing that meeting knows, oh, I know where I need to go with this. I know that, the conversation will take whatever course it's going to take, but if I ever need to get back on track, I have this thing to sort of walk me through, okay, this section, that section, the next thing. So it can be so useful to just bring some structure to a conversation while still leaving room for it to be a conversation. A good case presentation deck is, it's easy to test. You can, versus, it's hard to test a printed brochure, but a case presentation deck, you can just iterate that. You get a first draft, do it for your colleagues, see what they say. Do it for your some board members who will be really constructive and useful. Develop it a little bit further. Do it for your full board, see what they say. Then start doing it out in donor settings and see what feedback you get. So you can iterate and keep it evolving without ever having to say, okay, this is the final version. Let's print 1,000 of them. It can double as a print piece, as I mentioned. You can do it in that flipbook format, and they're great for training. If you want to get your board members comfortable with using your messaging, a presentation is a good way to walk them through that. So, okay, I've been talking a big game about what a good case presentation deck can do for you. Let's look at an example, and this is from a campaign. And I'm not going to really talk too much about the substance of it. I just want you to see a little bit of how it's constructed. So, it has some opening slides that give some broader framing to the purpose, the sort of grounding in the mission for this campaign, some contextual points that remind donors, in this case, parents and alums at a school, to sort of reactivate some of their knowledge about the school. It gives a clear expression of the vision. It says, okay, if you only remember a couple things, this is what this campaign is about. It's about strengthening our community, supporting teachers, and giving all of the boys at this school some new tools. So it's forcing you to kind of commit clear ideas into a concise format that you can say out loud. It walks through, introduces the campaign. Here's the name. It's $20 million. It's got these two major categories with some supporting projects within them, and then it gives you a way to walk through some specific projects. So, talking about scholarships, here are the points that we want every donor conversation to touch on about scholarships. There's a building project in this campaign, so here's some images of the building, some points about some of its key features and benefits. It's going to have this cool innovation lab. Here's how that works. Here's a little bit more about some of the kinds of projects, the way this is going to support different kinds of learning. Here's something. Here's the next capital project. I'm only showing you some excerpts of this presentation. There's a lot in this campaign, so it's actually a pretty substantive piece. But the point is, the format just kind of forces you to kind of organize your information in a clear way, create some hierarchy of the key messages, the supporting points, the 2 or 3 key benefits you want someone to know about every project. And I find it's just an easier way to get through that versus writing a 12-page, 15-page case statement or a lengthy brochure. It's so much easier to get lost in a long, narrative document than it is in a presentation format that forces you to take your ideas, sort of divide them up into bite-sized pieces and put them in a sequence and figure out what that sequence is and how it works. And once you have that, this is something that makes your board members feel like, oh, okay, I can go talk with someone about this. If they ask me a question about like what's in the innovation lab or what this building project is about, I'm probably going to have the key information at my fingertips to point out. So I feel a little less worried about looking dumb when somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer to. It's helpful on a variety of levels. It also, once you've got the presentation deck, it's pretty easy then to expand that or adapt that into whatever print materials or narrative case materials you want to have. So with that in mind, let's move on to talking about if every organization needs a good presentation deck, you probably also want some donor-specific print materials. And you can do these in a wide range of ways that fits your resources. I'm just going to touch on a few different possible options here. Because, print materials, this is an area where you can spend tens of thousands of dollars, or you can spend close to nothing. Really depends on what you need and what the approach is that's going to work for you. So how do you find your approach? You want to kind of place yourself on a few different little spectrums here. So for your donor audience, do you need materials that emphasize vision and inspiration and emotional activation, and or more of a business case that's more of a rationally argued or logically developed case? This is a question you need to ask when you're developing your case and messaging, even before you think about materials. But it really shapes the way you approach materials, because if you're over on the left side of this and you really need to activate people with a sense of inspiration or convey an aspirational sense of your future that is emotionally engaging and activating to people, then you really need to be thinking about the visual impact of your materials, the way they feel in the hand. Do they convey a sense of weight? Do they convey a sense of significance? Should they be, it's hard to convey a big vision in a small piece. I don't know why our brains just make that connection, but they do. So even just the format size of what you produce matters. To the extent that you're on that left side of the page, you really need to be thinking more about photography, renderings, what you're expressing visually, and what the immediate sort of felt impact of that is, versus the impact that sinks in on reading. If you're more on the right side, if you're mostly oriented towards foundation and corporate donors, what you need is a piece that looks and feels very substantive and no nonsense and no frills, maybe. So that may be not even, it may be something that is nicely laid out and maybe designed in a very minimal sense, but that is very much more of a white paper or a proposal template that delivers substance in a really clearly organized way and doesn't try to bring in, I don't know, more expressive touches that may not be of interest to your audience. So that's one spectrum. Next one we think about is what's the level of content that you want to have in your print materials. And this is really, you have some room to work here because you don't need to have everything in your campaign brochure or your general case, major donor print pieces that you might want to use. You can actually just keep it to much more of a high level piece and then supplement that with other information as it's needed. Or you can go much more in depth and try to produce, a single piece that really goes to the full depth of the case. And we'll show you some examples of this, but just want you to know that you have some discretion here. The final piece you want to think about is what's going to be the right balance in terms of your budget and the impression you want to give regarding the higher production value versus more of an economical piece. And some of this is just going to be driven by what your budget is. Some of it might be driven by how, if you know that your case is going to evolve every 6 months for the next 2 years because the projects you're funding for are still evolving, then you don't want to do a expensive print run of pieces that will be outdated before you have a chance to use them all. There's also sometimes a concern about, how do we convey, how glossy and slick do we want to be, given that our donors may feel like, oh, why did you spend so much money on this brochure? We hear that question from clients, or that concern raised by clients with some regularity. I think it can be overstated. I think it feels like it's a question about budget, but I think it's often more of a question about taste. Like if you do something that is gaudy, or has a bunch of metal foil treatments on it, and it might not even be that expensive, but it's going to feel like you sort of overdid it on production. Whereas you may do a piece that is actually kind of expensive, but is designed so tastefully and with such a sense of good design balance and restraint that it doesn't feel like it's too much. So I want to just put that word of caution about don't obsess too much over, if we spend too much money on this, our donor's going to pick up on that. It's much more a question of, is it designed well? So let's talk about a few examples that strike different balances on these spectrums. So I'm going to show you a 12-page campaign brochure. I think of this as a very sort of down the middle, just good prototypical campaign brochure. It conveys a balance of the bigger aspirational message for this campaign, but it does have a decent amount of substance and business case for why this campaign is needed. In terms of that middle question, it's more in depth than just a visionary overview, but it doesn't go into every detail about the campaign, so it's kind of a middle way there. And the production value is, this is a nicely produced piece that conveys a nice impression, but it's not super expensive, or it's not pulling out all the stops. So I'm not even really going to talk about the content. I just want to sort of flip through and give you a chance to see how this piece works with again, simple photography, clear messaging, and about 12 pages of content. This is a building project to build a new headquarters for this organization. And so opening with just a simple expression of the vision, going into a bit of information about sort of credentialing the organization, what they do, why it matters, some testimonial quotes. Then we introduce the campaign vision, and this is meant to look and feel big because that's sort of the big idea at the heart of this campaign. Then we go into what this new building is going to do, how it's going to help keep up with the changing world of medicine, how it's going to benefit all of their members and help them be better pediatricians. We make some connections to how it's going to support specific programs that people may want to see funded or expanded or better supported around the world. And then we turn toward toward the ask, and a quick summary of the building's cost, the campaign goal, when the timeline for the project, and some closing thoughts. So there's this piece has, I think, 12 pages of content, not counting the cover, and it walks you through from the vision and a bit of context into the project and some of the details, but not everything, and gets you to an ask. And this is, it's a piece that feels substantive and substantial, but it's not too much. It feels nice, but it's not overproduced. And I think it's just a good prototypical example of it for a campaign brochure. You may not need that. That may not be what's right for you. You may need something that is, you may not be in a position where it makes sense to do a professional print run of pieces that are going to be more static. If you're earlier on in a campaign, you may want to do something that's more of a lightly designed white paper, where the level of depth, the balance of sort of vision and details you can strike wherever you need it to. But the point is, you can do a piece that you can print in office, and you could still have this piece designed, have it carry your branding, have it be nicely laid out with some sidebars and boxes and stuff. And I will show you an example later on that is kind of along these lines. But you can do this in a way that you can print on your office printer and still have it look professional. I think the key is to take that step from a Word document to having some level of graphic design and layout, so that it feels, even if it's just a very professional white paper, still feels like it's been pulled together with an eye for design. Maybe what you need is actually just a grant proposal template that is all the way on the business case side, that is fairly detailed, and of course, there's no real production cost associated with that. I want to show you another set of examples here. We do this a lot with campaigns, and also with, when we're helping an organization outside of a campaign context. They just need materials to help them with major giving. Very frequently we'll do a modular system where you have a folder and some level of an overview piece or brochure, and then some supplemental inserts that go into depth on particular projects. So I'm going to show you a couple examples that this is how I sort of rated them. I would describe these pieces as balancing both vision and the business case, capturing the overview and going in depth, and these are at a higher production level. So this is, I'll show you first system I'm going to show you is, this is a campaign for an organization called Yellowstone Forever, and these are the first 4 spreads, or 4 of the opening spreads of the brochure. There's a really nicely produced campaign overview brochure that sets the sort of the visionary, aspirational tone that uses, and because it's trying to do that, uses photography very, very extensively. The campaign overview brochure really just, it doesn't go into too much depth on the project. It's really just saying, at a big picture level, what is this campaign about? Why should you care about it? Then, tucked behind that in the folder that it's packaged in, is a series of 4 inserts these are more like white papers. These are going to the next level of detail on 4 specific funds that the campaign is going to support. So another similar example, this is for a campaign for the Chicago History Museum called This is Chicago. So again, there's a campaign overview brochure that presents the big picture message at a pretty high visionary aspirational level. So you see it has opening spreads that really just try to invoke the spirit of the city, that draw on archival photography that captures the city's history, and makes connections between moments in Chicago's history to Chicago's present. This piece begins to go into some of the campaign's projects. For instance, there's a section that's focused on investing in their home, their actual museum facility. We have some information about the projects that we want to do in that area, but the brochure itself does not go into a ton of depth on the specific projects, and it ends at a very big picture this is the closing spread. It ends at that bigger aspirational level. So the brochure, again, is just trying to give you the high points, the bigger picture messaging. But then when you get into the inserts, there's a set of, I think it's 5 of them, maybe 6. This is where all the detail on specific projects live. And these all get packaged together in a folder. So this kind of modular approach to print materials I find to be really valuable because it gives you the chance to kind of it can be hard to balance in a single piece the need for very big picture messaging and a lot of substance. And sometimes I think about how unique our challenge is as fundraisers when it comes to communicating for major donors, because it's different than just like sort of simple retail consumer advertising or something. Like you do need that high level tagline and catchy messaging and clever, you need that strong, like simple creative concept, messaging, taglines, everything to hook people. But then you also need the substance to back up what is in many cases like a $1 million investment proposition. So you need both like the catchiness of the best consumer retail branding and marketing and the substance of a serious business proposal. And it can be hard to make all that happen in a single piece. So a modular system lets you kind of break that out and have the big picture piece and the more detailed substantive piece. One other material area I want to just touch on, we're not going to go into it too much because it probably deserves a whole webinar unto itself, but think about video if you have a well-defined and high-value use for it. Video has some amazing strengths. It is the most effective format for creating an immediate emotional connection with your audience and for giving them sort of a complete and encompassing experience of your message that weaves both words and images and sound together. It's the most complete experience you can provide, but it's pretty expensive. It takes a lot of planning, and once you do it, it tends to be fairly static. So you have to weigh those pros and cons against each other. And to me, that means if you want to do video, it's all about making sure you know exactly what you're trying to do with it, and that's going to give you significant value to justify the investment. So with that in mind, the 3 most common uses for video in a fundraising context that we see and that we work with our clients and organizations to accomplish, of course, showing a video at group cultivation events, at your gala. That can be at your gala at that largest scale where you have a captive audience and you want to get everybody just completely energized. But this can also be very, very valuable at smaller group cultivation events. And I think there are a ton of organizations that are at that point in their major gift development or their campaign life cycle where they've got a pretty wide group of people who they think might be major gift prospects, but they're maybe not quite qualified to the level of doing one-on-one cultivation visits with them. And so if you've got that list of like 200 people and you want to really find the 50 to focus on, one great way to do that would be to have a series of small group cultivation events on your campus, on site, hosted wherever, where you get, 10 or 15 people together at a time, or you invite that many people, and you walk them through an experience that begins with showing them a video, and then maybe walks through some of the key points in a presentation deck, and then engages them in discussion. And you can decide whether this is more of a in-depth focus group style discussion, or whether you're just really cultivating them as a group. And then you see from that group who, from those conversations, where you may want to go next in terms of individual cultivation. So video can be so great to kind of be to anchor those kinds of small group settings. Second point, sending ahead of donor visits. I love this as a way to say, once you've got, or as you're getting a meeting on the books with an individual prospect, here, we're going to send you this video to just give you a sense of what this campaign is about. If they watch it, that's great. You've given them something to prepare for the meeting. If they don't, you can, and this is the third point, you can share it in individual donor visits. You got to think about how you manage that in the context of a conversation. If you're meeting at a restaurant, maybe it doesn't make as much sense, but if you have the setup and if it feels right in the context of that conversation, we see a lot of organizations that will start off a donor conversation by sharing a video. And in particular, I've seen this be really useful for kind of turning that corner from the more general sort of chatty opening part of the conversation into the, okay, now let's really talk about what we're here to talk about part of the conversation. It can be a nice segue there once you've done the niceties, ask them some, kind of just gotten the conversation warmed up, gotten comfortable, and then you say, okay, well, what I really want to talk to you about today is this, this new campaign that we're launching. Let me just take a minute and just show you this video because it kind of captures it at the big picture level. And then you kind of turn the corner into the next part of the conversation. The other thing that can be great about that is that, especially for board members, when you have a campaign that has bigger picture, visionary, more rhetorical kind of messaging, you're making some more bold and lofty statements. Like, people want that from campaigns in a lot of ways, but it can make board members nervous because they're like, oh wait, I can't talk like that. Like, I know I can talk to this person about this campaign, but I can't deliver that kind of perfectly crafted, big picture visionary message. And a video is really good for that. So you can let that take some pressure off your volunteers to be able, you're just saying, like, you guys don't need to be able to deliver the lofty rhetoric of this campaign. The video will cover you for that. We want you to take it from there and lead the conversation, personalize it, connect it to your passion, go into some greater depth with whoever we're talking to. It can take some pressure off their role. So that's our quick rundown of the materials that we think you probably need and probably want. Let's use the rest of our time here to talk about a few tips, tricks, keys to great materials. And I think these tend to be true for all different types of organizations. So think about how they might apply to you and at what level you might access them. The first, very simple, invest in better photography. And I'm not going to say too much about this. I just want to make the point that so much of the impression and the impact and the felt quality of fundraising materials, it comes down to the quality of the photography. It's almost like a ceiling that you can't really get above with your design and messaging. It's just how people experience things. So I'm going to show you 4 slides with the same simple message. Let's imagine these are examples from. I imagined a conservation campaign focused on the Boundary Waters, which is an area in northern Minnesota that I love. It's just a place I've spent a lot of time. So here's our message over a really lovely photo. Same message over another good photo. Same message down another click. And same message over a bad photo. It makes the message feel weaker, really, I think. And by the end of this, I'm like, I don't know, I look at this photo, I'm like, if that's what's at stake, whatever, pave it over. So I won't say too much more about that. Photography is one of those things that a fairly simple investment, and honestly, it's usually more the investment of time and attention. Oh, am I going to have to plan a photo shoot? Am I going to have to find a photographer? Am I going to have to come up with a shot list? Like, good photography is not really all that expensive, but just the time and the attention and figuring out what you want, like, that's the hurdle that I think sometimes keeps us from, that we struggle to get over. And when we are working with organizations, they rarely already have the photos that they need for the pieces we want to create. Similar point, if you're doing any kind of capital project, do not underestimate the value of renderings. And you don't need a lot. Even just one good one can make, sometimes it's better to have fewer, just one good one that gives your donors the chance to kind of picture the thing in their mind or start to imagine what it would be. So I already showed you this from one of the early spreads of that campaign brochure. I don't even know that I don't think we really had any other interior renderings in this piece at all. Just this one thing that gives you a sense, oh, it's going to be, that's what it's going to be. So anytime you have a capital project, I really think it's worth, and sometimes it's worth even holding back on producing print materials until you have renderings to use. They make such a difference. So this will not be a surprise from anyone who's attended previous webinars. If you want to have strong materials, make sure you have a clear message and make that message drive everything. This is going back to something I mentioned earlier, that you can spend a lot of money on materials and spend a lot of time on them and still have a weak message and have them not really accomplish all that much for you. And that's when materials tend to start to look overproduced, or like maybe you wasted money on them because they don't seem to have a clear enough message to deliver. So I'm just going to show you some examples of how you use materials sort of as delivery systems for your clear core messages. This is actually from an annual report that our team developed for the Wilderness Society. And almost every spread in this annual report devotes a decent chunk of real estate to just taking the main point and expressing it in a really clear message. And then once you've got the message, you can figure out what is the image that goes with that message. I think you see the sense of standing up and the sense of toughness that expressed in the photo here. Here's another example from that same annual report. So, we've got this lovely print piece, and we're using a lot of the space just to deliver very simple messages verbally and visually. And again, I'm going to show you a little bit of a build-up. So this is an example from the Alzheimer's Association, where they had a very clear central message that the movement to end Alzheimer's disease isn't just a battle, it's a race. So there's a sort of race against time is basically the message. And that's because every day another 10,000 baby boomers turn 65, and after that their risk for developing the disease doubles every 5 years. So that was a message that we had developed, fairly early on in the project, and then we got to figure out, if that's our message, how do we express it through the materials? We figured out what charts and illustrations would help demonstrate that, and then we used that to build the piece around it. So this is a spread from a major donor piece. This was not specific to a campaign, just for their major gift team to use. And there's a bit more supporting copy that you see over on the right page, but really what this particular spread of this piece is just about delivering a single clear message. And when we are mapping out a new print piece for a project, we will often really think about, we'll actually draw out on our whiteboard, here are each of the 6 or 8 or 10 or however many spreads of the brochure. We'll just write, what is the message for each of these spreads? And it's usually 1 or 2 key ideas, not too much more. Another key that I think can be hopefully a little bit liberating for you is that to focus on quality of the piece over the length of the piece. Think about people are really, really good at forming impressions of quality, and they're not that good at forming impressions of like depth and scope and length and how much was really there. So, and actually you'll get confusing feedback about this sometimes. Like sometimes you will have your board members review something you've written and say, oh, this wasn't complete. It wasn't substantive enough. I need more data. I need more information. And actually all of that information that they asked you for is already in there, but they didn't get it because the piece wasn't reader friendly, or it was just so lost in actually being too substantive that they didn't get the information that was already in there. And then you can sometimes come back and show them something that's shorter, and they'll feel like it actually gives them more. So a good example of a piece like this is a very simple campaign brochure. I'm going to show you the entirety of it. There's a cover, inside front cover, and the first bound-in page introduces the campaign overview. This is what I would call more of a white paper style document. It has a nice cover on it and uses photography, but it really is basically a white paper with a nicely designed cover on it. So first page, there is this one inside spread that goes through the 4 areas of the campaign in a really efficient overview. And then this is the last spread, call to action, message from campaign co-chairs, a little bit of additional information about the organization. And then on the right side, you see a little folder pocket where we've tucked in some additional inserts that go into detail on specific programs and projects within the campaign. But the point is, this piece is only 4 pages long. It conveys quality, and it conveys a sense of depth because it efficiently covers a lot of territory. So it doesn't feel like it's, really like slight, especially because we do have the supplemental inserts there. But the goal with this was to make the best piece that we could, not the longest or the most exhaustive piece that we could. And for this campaign, that meant keeping it pretty simple and just executing at a higher level. So this is a key that you can kind of take and run with in a lot of different ways, especially when you're in a campaign setting. You need something, and it can really be only one little touch that makes it feel special. Because campaigns in particular, but major giving in general, is all about taking people who are giving at this level, maybe annually, and giving them some sort of, dislodging them from that like habitual level of giving and getting them to some higher level. How do you get people out of their pattern of giving and get them to think about something that's on another order of magnitude from anything they've done? You need messages, ideas, visions, and materials that activate and that can take people up a level. So oftentimes with campaign materials in particular, we're looking at what's 1 or 2 things we can do to just make a piece feel special or give it some attention-grabbing quality. So oftentimes that can be just a simple, like a production approach. This was actually an annual report, but we decided, instead of doing it in a bound booklet, to do it as a series of one-off like cards and supplement. It's a loose set of cards that cover all the different pieces they wanted to cover, and it's tucked together in this little folder that has a little band that goes around it and ties it all together. So again, it was just the kind of thing that it didn't really change the content or how the content was structured. It just meant that when you gave it to someone, they were very unlikely to throw it out, They were like, they want to play with it. They want to interact with it. They have it in their hands, and it just wants to be engaged with. Here's an example from a campaign brochure where this is a very straightforward, good, solid campaign brochure. But the one touch here was to give it a fold-out cover. And we had a message. We got to this because we had a message that was all about moments. It was all about how this campaign is investing in the kinds of facilities and programs that create those moments that change students' lives frequently, and it's really especially focused on extracurriculars. So we wanted to show the moments on the playing field or on the debate stage or in a school play, these moments that stick with you and that change you and that actually, those are the things you remember from your education and that change your life. So we put that message into the inside front cover and then actually had it then fold out to show and to depict those kinds of moments. And the rest of the brochure is pretty straightforward, a nice balance of different kinds of content. We wanted that one special touch that, again, when you have it in your hands, that you want to interact with it. You're not going to just sort of leave that there. You're going to play with it a little bit. Coach your volunteers to use your materials. This is very simple. I'm not going to say too much about it, but once you have them, you actually have to, it's not just a matter of putting them in people's hands. You have to take some time at a development committee meeting, at a board meeting to say, here's how we envision you using these. let them practice it on each other, let them get used to flipping through or using the flip book or using a presentation deck. Give them some actual practice with it, and then it doesn't take very much. They'll be pretty comfortable. Design your materials for shelf life, and that can mean, especially if you want to justify the investment in producing some nice materials that will support your major giving for a while. You got to make sure you're not obviously putting anything in there that's going to be out of date in 6 months. So that's where a modular system can be really useful, because you can have kind of an overview piece that is all the stuff you know is not going to change, and then you can use inserts. The inserts you can actually just print in Office and leave them fully editable. Final key I want to share here is just to think about packaging. We've shown you some examples here that use kind of a modular system. Even if all you have is a really nicely designed folder, and everything else that you're putting in there is actually just printed off in your office, like a nice white paper or a donor proposal that you've written up, even if everything else you're doing is just straight out of Microsoft Word, to be able to package it in a folder, or maybe a folder plus a really nicely designed 2-page thing that just says, here's your 2-page guide to investing in our mission. Just those little things can change the overall feeling of what you're presenting. All right, so that was our final key, thinking about how to create great materials. We've just finished our 4th session here. We hope you'll join us for the 5th session. We have a couple minutes here to take some questions, so I'm going to see if there are any in here that I can speak to. Let's see. All right, so I'm seeing some questions, but none yet that I think would be of, we want to make sure we're speaking of general use and relevance to everyone on the call. So we're going to wrap up, and I want to thank you all for joining us, and especially to those of you who've been through some of our other webinars in this series. Hope you'll join us again, and please don't hesitate to be in touch by email if you have any other questions or want to get in touch with us. So thank you all so much.